Welcome to Vintage SF. I'm Richard Rempel, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Jonathan from Words and Time. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you, Richard. I'm excited to talk some science fiction and go to battle, a friendly sci-fi battle from across the oceans, I guess.
USA versus the world and science fiction authors. We're just going to limit it to five, although have a feeling we're going to mention others as we're going along. But before we start that, I would like to hear a little bit about your science fiction origin story, as I call it, how you came to love reading in the genre.
Yeah, the first science fiction book that I can remember reading, and it's a bit of a hybrid book, was the Transel Saga by Gary Paulson. And if that author name sounds familiar, it's because he wrote The Hatchet, which I was also a big
Ah,
fan of when I was
mhm.
young. And it's this kind of portal fantasy, time travel adventure. I got totally sucked into the world. I think it's the first book that I remember rereading. I finished it and I wanted to read it again. And I was a kid that liked reading, but I wasn't the biggest reader. And so that was sort of like a big thing for me, exciting to get into that. And then the next sci-fi book that I remember loving after that was Contest by Matthew Riley. He's actually an Australian writer, more well known for like military action adventure, like Ice Station and that kind of thing. But Contest was really cool. It's about like a bunch of people, one human person gets picked to be put into this library and forced to fight against alien representatives from different planets. So it's kind of like a battle royale in like an enclosed environment with different aliens. And so those are some of the first books that I remember reading as a kid and a teenager that got me into science fiction.
And you grew up in Australia, right?
Yes, born in England, but then when I was young, moved to Australia and then lived in Australia until I was 24. So I've been able to travel around a little bit, but I think of myself as Australian.
And although that you're going to be representing the world, you actually live in the United States right now, right?
I do live in the United States now, but I'm a proud Aussie. Still got the Aussie citizenship and passport, and happy to represent Team World with maybe an Australian author on the team. We'll have to see
Oh,
if
that
I
would
can
be
sneak
great.
one in there for the Aussies.
And I'm also from one of those Commonwealth countries. I'm from Canada, but I'm proud to represent the United States in this one. Obviously, they are very strong, and so that's why we have them going against the world here.
Yeah, we got a bit of a Ryder Cup, President's Cup type situation for the golfers out there. We'll see if America can take on the world in sci-fi.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The Ryder Cup. That's a good analogy. I was thinking about the Olympics as well, and some of the selections of teams there. So the concept that we have here is Jonathan and I are going to do a little bit of a back and forth with authors that we've selected to represent our team, our country, or the world. And we're going to have some fun with this, but we also just want to perhaps introduce you to an author you don't know about, or think a little bit more about some of the works that they have. And we'll see how this goes. So, Jonathan, I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to the larger one here. And I
Nice.
think we're going to give let's go to tennis now. We'll give the world the first serve here.
Okay, so I've picked my team strategically. I've picked an author that I think you're a fan of. That might be one a little difficult for you to argue against, and that is Stanislaw Lem, the Polish author, most well known for Solaris, although he has quite the impressive catalogue. And I've only read two of his books so far, Solaris and the Futurological Congress, and they were both 5-star reads for me, which is pretty impressive. And I recently purchased The Invincible, which I'm very excited to read soon as well. So, yeah, I think something unique for me about Stanislav Lem is he uses science fiction ideas and concepts to kind of drive the narrative, but they're very philosophical. The themes, I think, are really rich and rewarding, and he approaches things from an interesting angle where he makes me think about somewhat common ideas within science fiction to do with first contact and space travel and things like that, but from a slightly different angle. I think he has a really unique way at looking at science fiction, and to be able to combine some of those harder elements along with the softer elements of sci-fi, I think is something that I found really rewarding while reading his books. And while I've only read a couple, he has a range of styles as well, because Solaris is quite heavy hitting, whereas the Futurological Congress is a little bit more satirical. It's quite humorous, it's quite trippy and surreal. So I think he has sort of like a range of writing skills at his disposal.
He's definitely an all-star. I can definitely support your pick there. Tough competition. I really enjoyed Invincible. I think that you will too. It is that
Nice.
mix that you talk about, that hard SF with a softer edge in times and lots of philosophy and lots to chew on and think about in his novels.
Yes, that's something I enjoy about his books. I enjoy them while reading them. I feel like they're relatively approachable, but they have a staying power too. They're
Mhm.
books that I'll think about a week after, a month after, finishing them with sort of like a fresh perspective and ideas that I'm still trying to make sense of in my brain.
I'm gonna rally here. I'm gonna say first, I'm gonna put some of the really big guys on the bench because I think we've heard lots about Asimov, Heinlein, and Herbert. I mean, they're so prevalent out there. I think I'm just gonna put them on the bench and talk about more people. Now, this next one, arguably is as big. Ray Bradbury. Ray Bradbury is a short story writer primarily, and his short stories have this unique blend of science fiction, fantasy, horror, along with sort of poignant emotional notes to them. And I really think that he is just an amazing writer. His prose just really grabs you. Now, I'm not saying he's the best science fiction writer out there, but I think that the way he writes is so approachable to almost everyone. Um, some of the I did grab a couple of books. Some of the books that you might think of would be like the Martian Chronicles or the Illustrated Man. Both of those are really short stories all strung together, even though there's a theme to it. A lot of people perhaps had to study Fahrenheit 451. So Bradbury is not only a literary giant, he's a science fiction giant as well. And I think most people would be well served to read some of his stories.
Yes, he wrote in a number of different genres, but I like trying to claim him as a part of team science fiction because he's such a good prose writer. And sometimes a criticism of science fiction, hard sci fi, classic sci fi is the writing's a little bit dry. And I'm like, no, 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 you got to read Ray Bradbury, and there's some others that I'm a fan of, like Dan Simmons or Christopher Rocchio or whatever. But Ray Bradbury, these an absolute master with the pen, some peak writing among science fiction. So I gotta push forward all of his sci-fi works to make sure that our team gets credit for Bradbury.
Bradbury and Lem. I think those guys can hold their own against each other.
Yeah.
So let's go to your next one.
Okay. For my next pick, I'm going to someone that I'm a fan of, and hard sci-fi fans are often a fan of. But this is a bit of a love-hate author. This might be a risky pick, and I'm going with Hannu Rajaniemi. So he grew up in Finland, and then in his 20s he moved to the UK, and then eventually America. So you can, different countries will probably try and want to acclaim him depending on where you are and if you're a fan of his works. But I'm taking him for Team World. He grew up in Finland and he wrote the books while in the UK. So I will say Hannu Rajaniemi is on my team, and that is for writing the Jean Laflambeau trilogy, starting with The Quantum Thief. So this is post-singularity cyberpunk. It's set incredibly far in the future, to the point where the technology almost feels like magic. Arthur C. Clarke would be proud. And it's very hard to make sense of at first because he does not hold your hand with the world building. There's a lot of terminology, a lot of technobabble. But the thing that helped me kind of get through that tough initial reading phase was just how fun the story was. It's a heist story. You have a thief, you have a detective, and it's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek style. It's quite humorous at times. And then as you start to make sense of this terminology and the ideas and all of those heavy sci-fi concepts kind of coincide with this fun story, oh man, it's some of the most fun I've had while reading science fiction, and some of the most rewarding science fiction. So if you have even just a small tolerance for hard sci-fi and complicated world building, please try The Quantum Thief.
And you know what? It's supposed to be fun, isn't it? I read some challenging things, but man, I enjoy those fun reads, the reads that you just keep turning the pages, the ones that you want to get back to as soon as you can. I have to admit, I haven't scouted this person on your team yet. I haven't read any of his work, but he sounds very interesting.
Yes, it's not just complicated to show off, and it's not dry. It is complicated, but complicated with a sense of fun.
Mhm.
So I think you might have a good time, Richard.
Well, let's go to my next one here. I think you're going to be very familiar with this one. I'm going to actually have two people on my team that have K in the middle of their name. And this one's
Okay.
going to be Philip K. Dick. Uh, he was a person who really didn't quite get the acclaim during his life that maybe he could have. But a little movie called Blade Runner was filmed from one of his short stories. And that film, he was there while they were starting to make it, but at the age of 54, he passed away, and so he really didn't see the success of the film and see that his work all started to be coming back into print, and people wanted to read his stuff. He had lots of short stories in the 50s and 60s, and then he really turned to novels. And there's many that a lot of people might know that we can, there's films of it. One film that might be a bit of a hidden gem is Scanners Darkly. I'm not sure if I have the full name
Yes.
there,
A Scanner
but it's
Darkly. The
done.
film is great.
Yeah, it's got an interesting animation style where they took live film and animated over top of it.
Yeah,
But
the
Phil K. Dick,
rotoscoping is incredible. It's worth it for the visuals alone, and it's a very faithful adaptation as well.
so Phil K. Dick really wrote a lot about reality, and I found that a lot of his plotting didn't take turns that you might expect. And I'll throw a couple novel names out there too. Ubik, Ubik is one of his famous novels. The oh, I just have them over here. Uh, I read with some people the best of Philip K. Dick, a lot of his short stories. But the one that I'm thinking of here as well is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Um, and, and so, yeah, and that's what the basis of Blade Runner was, right?
Yes.
Yes. So it
That
wasn't a
one's a
short
more
story.
loose adaptation, though.
That's true. If you read the novel and look at the movie, you'll see it's very different. Although I have to say that I think that the movie is spectacular in its own right too. I think Philip K. Dick is somebody. If you like to think about reality, if you like to have some very interesting plotting going on, and in some ways sparse prose, just keeps moving the story on as fast as it's possible. I think that you might like Philip K. Dick.
Yes, so you're using my own strategy against me here with PKD being one of my favorite writers. I have read 12 of his books, so I'm a pretty massive fan, with my two favorites being Ubik and The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch,
Mm-hmm.
although he has a lot of good books, A Scanner Darkly included. And yes, he just has such a unique style. I feel like if you were to just hand me a random page, it could be from any science fiction book, and you just gave me some pages to read and say, Jonathan, which author wrote this? I feel like PKD, I'd probably be able to guess. Maybe Kurt Vonnegut. There's one or two others that just, their writing style is so distinct that I think that I could pick them out of a crowd. And I think that's such a special quality to have as a writer, to have a unique voice, to have a unique writing style. And so if you click with that surreal, trippy, things that will make you question identity, and storylines that don't really necessarily follow like a linear path. It's not, his books tend not to be so much focused on plot and characters, but more just ideas and themes. And so if you like that in a writer, then I think you'll find a lot to enjoy with PKD's catalog, which is extensive.
And you mentioned Vonnegut. I definitely considered him. We'll see if he makes the list for today.
Uh oh, I'm in trouble. Okay, well, for my next pick, I'm going to go to a popular one. Another author from the harder end of the sci-fi spectrum, and that is Cixin Liu, the author of the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy, starting with The Three Body Problem. So, if you're a fan of character work, maybe not for you. If you're a fan of fancy prose, maybe not for you. But if you are a fan of ideas that are going to melt your brain, just take your comprehension abilities and just throw them into a blender and just splatter that out onto the page, that's what you get. Because when I read the three body problem, I thought, wow, there's some crazy stuff here. I'm not sure I quite understood all of it, but I am totally on board and looking forward to the rest of the trilogy. And the next two books are exponentially crazier than the first book. So if you like the three body problem, I think you're going to be in for a good time with the trilogy. And people, I feel like people, I'm not sure if you've read them. If you have, you can let me know your favorite. I feel like the reading audience is generally split between books 2 and 3. I liked the ideas the most in book 3, Death's End, but the story in The Dark Forest just really captivated me because I felt like there was about 10 different plot ideas that you could have expanded into a whole novel, and he just included all of them. Like every 50 pages, we were doing something new and exciting, and the way they were resolved and twisted and little threads got pulled on and, paid off later in the novel really, really impressed me. So I'm maybe leaning more towards my hard sci-fi fans out there so far, but Cixin Liu, I think, is another strong one.
I can see my scouting mission is ahead here because I haven't read it. I did watch
Wow.
the Netflix version of Three Body Problem. I don't know how accurate was that to the novel if you've seen it.
Fairly, and I quite like the
Mhm.
show. I thought they did a relatively good job of adapting something that I think is quite tricky to adapt, but they did pull from the sequel books, so it's
Oh,
a little jumbled up.
okay.
Story wise, they focus mostly on book one, but then started to get a little mixed. But I don't
So
think it'll have ruined the series for you if you decide to pick up the books now.
there's another movie I've seen on Netflix called The Wandering Earth. Is that by him as well?
The Wandering Earth. I've only read his Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy. That title sounds familiar, but I'm not sure if he wrote it.
Boy, two of your picks I got to scout and read some of their books. But this next one, this is the other K, Ursula K. Le Guin. Uh, Another one of my favorite authors, somebody that I really didn't know a lot about until a couple of years ago. I've read her first 10 years of books, and that includes the vast majority of the Hainish universe cycle. This is a cycle where there's people populating planets around the known universe, and these people have lost contact with each other and lost that connection. And now, as technology and space travel is starting up again, they're trying to reconnect. I'm trying to remember the name potentially of the
Yeah.
political group, but they are trying to connect with planets and see if they want to join them. This is a setup for every single adventure novel that she creates. And there is adventure in them to be with a planet where humans have taken a little bit of a different turn than we might be familiar with. And so she started off with three very short novels, and then she had a novel called The Left Hand of Darkness. And that one is her most famous novel, I would argue, potentially with The Dispossessed, which are both in this universe. Um, Her prose is beautiful. Her world setup sometimes can turn people off for a little while because it takes maybe a third to half a novel to get into it. But I find then once it clicks, that you are in for an amazing ride. She's not only a great SF novelist as well, she's written the Earthsea Cycle, which is an amazing fantasy series, which is probably responsible for why we have Harry Potter. Uh,
Ooh.
if you have read or seen the Harry Potter films, know that Earthsea Cycle was there first in the 60s with a wizardly school, with a person who had a scar on their head, a student, and would this student
Really?
make it? Some very big similarities there. But anyways, Ursula K. Le Guin to me is a literary genius who touches notes on our hearts and our some of the issues of today are present in her work, and is just a satisfying read on a number of levels.
Nice. So I have read two Ursula K. Le Guin novels. I started with The Left Hand of Darkness, and to be honest, I was a little bit mixed on that one. I felt like it was a little slow to get moving, and yeah, just some of the character dynamics were really kind of what was like carrying the book, and the plot didn't move forward that quickly. And I think it is supposed to be more about exploring sort of sociological themes, which I think would have been groundbreaking at the time. I can definitely see how this was like a revolutionary book and an influential book. But reading it in modern times, while I still give it credit, I'm not sure if I enjoyed it as much as I quite wanted to. And then I read The Lave of Heaven, and I really enjoyed that one. That one has a fun premise with someone that is dreaming things that then become reality, and they go to see a therapist, and the therapist thinks that they might be able to influence this person's dreams and therefore reality.
I was just
Apparently,
going
that
to
was
say,
influenced by Philip K. Dick. It was a bit of an homage in terms of the style to PKD, which is maybe why I connected with it. But it wasn't just the style. I think she executed it really well. I felt like it was really tight. It was really focused. She did a great job of sort of drawing out the themes from that premise, and so I was very impressed. So after that, I bought The Dispossessed, and I'm looking forward to reading that one and see how it compares.
I was going to say that it was very PKD like, so I'm not surprised that you liked it in that way. And The Dispossessed is very different from both of them. Le Guin was a Taoist, and so there's the yin and yang, the idea of dark and light. And we have a moon that is a very light colored moon that has people who are basically exiled there from a planet, and they send their um, a professor back from that planet, from the moon to the planet, and it's about, can these people reunite again? Can they find ways past their differences? A lot of politics, a lot of philosophy, but very interesting.
Ooh. Well, you've picked a couple of middle initial K authors. I'm thinking, should I tactically on the fly maybe pick up Richard K. Morgan to
Oh,
go tit for tat with you? But I think I'm going to stick with my original list. I'm going to go for a bit of a wild card, another one of my personal favorites, and that is Andreas Eschbach, an author from Germany who wrote The Carpet Makers. So The Carpet Makers is set in this far future. It has a bit of a dying earth type feel. And there are these people that dedicate their entire lives to making a single carpet out of human hair. And there's this kind of rich history behind that and a reason behind that. And it's kind of mysterious. And it sort of, as it unfolds, it kind of grows into this grander, more epic space opera, with a lot of those mysteries finally being revealed in such a cool fashion. This book has such a unique structure because each chapter is a short story, but it's not a stitch-up novel. Each short story, while independent, links together. They all tie together. They all weave together like a carpet itself to tell you the story of these carpet makers. This is a book that I read last year, and it just blew me away. It became an instant favorite. I think it's the only book of his that's been translated into English. If anybody knows of any other of his books out there that I can get my hands on in English, or can maybe wants to teach me German. If there's any German language teachers out there, hit me up because I want to read some more Andreas Eschbach.
that sounds fascinating. I, I can't believe your team. I'm learning a lot here. I'd never heard of this one either. I think I may have seen your review on it, and it sounds very good.
I got to go to bat for the up and comers, the rookies. They've spent their time on the bench. I'm starting them today, Richard.
I think I'm dealing more with some pro players here instead of some of these rookies or college players. I left some of the ones in the 21st century out of the team, at least this lineup. Uh, my next one then to counter that will be somebody who was a bit of a punk. He was a cyberpunk. William Gibson. I think that he is an amazing author who really put cyberpunk onto the scene for science fiction in the 1980s. In 1984, he wrote a book called Neuromancer. And before that, he had short stories, and they were collected in something called Burning Chrome. Now, he's not the first person to write sort of a punkish noir look at people jacking into an alternate reality, but he certainly is the one who put it all together in language that we understand now. And in fact, lots of terminology comes from his novels. And he continues to write and become, in my opinion, an even better writer. And I'm a Canadian. He moved to Vancouver. He is an American, but he's moved to Vancouver. And so we kind of claim him
Yeah,
partly as our own as well. But he's
understandably.
on the American team because that's his citizenship, I believe, still. If you're interested at all in the different subgenres within science fiction, well worth taking a look at William Gibson when it comes to cyberpunk.
Nice. So I read Neuromancer when I was kind of getting back into reading regularly again about 8, 10 years ago, picking up sci-fi, and I was reading the classics. You know, when you search online or you ask your friends what are the books to start with, and you often get Dune, Neuromancer, Hyperion. I'll be honest, I don't think that this might be a bit of a hot take. I don't know if those are the best ones to start with. I found Ender's Game very approachable. I found Foundation quite approachable. Neuromancer. Neuromancer kind of made me feel dumb, to be honest. Neuromancer was one, when I was reading it, I thought, this is interesting. It has a cool vibe. It has a cool world, but I'm really not understanding that much. I'm halfway through the book. I'm still struggling to follow things, and I got to the end of the book and I was still kind of confused. And so I went online, did a bit of research. Things sort of started to fall in place a bit more, and I started to be able to appreciate it, understand it, and enjoy it a bit more after having finished the book. And if I had to put together a list of books to reread, because I don't do a ton of rereading, there's only so much time to read, and I'm always excited to read something new. But if I were to make that list, Neuromancer might be at the top, because now I've got another 8 to 10 years of science fiction under my belt. I've read a lot more cyberpunk books that were influenced by Neuromancer, and to be able to go back and reread with some fresh eyes, I think I'd be able to understand and get more out of it than I did the first time.
I would agree that he is somewhat of an intimidating writer to start with. It's so dense with the world that he's created that it can be hard to follow. I think we've kind of caught up to it with our own language for the internet and for virtual reality. And so that in some ways, I think it's even more approachable now than it might have been, say, 20 years ago.
Because he coined a lot of those terms. The
Exactly.
Matrix, cyberspace. That's
Yeah.
William Gibson.
I would think that a really cool place to start with him might be Burning Chrome, his short stories. I felt that they were all accessible. I agree. You know what? I waited for a while since I returned to science fiction. I waited for a while before I read it because I knew I needed to get some science fiction under my belt before I approached that one. I think your hot take is right. This is not one of those ones that you would start with if you're looking for some of this classic science fiction that we're talking about here. You know, somebody like Bradbury might be a more accessible type of read to start with.
I would think so.
Yeah.
But maybe there's just some geniuses out there that picked up Neuromancer. It was like, Jonathan, this is easy. I was following from page one. Level up, buddy.
I think you've got one more pick for us.
All right, I've got one more, and I'm going to that well. I'm going to that hard sci-fi well, and I'm repping the home country with an Australian author, Greg Egan. So Greg Egan has written a number of famous hard sci-fi novels, with my favorite though being Permutation City. This is a cyberpunk novel, kind of influenced by Neuromancer, but focuses a little bit more on the cyber than the punk. There's a lot of computer tech, there's a lot of science, biology, chemistry, where a man is trying to find a way to create eternal life through virtual reality. And we follow a couple of different characters, including people that are known as copies. And this book combines mind-blowing sci-fi concepts with jaw-dropping twists. There were a number of times I got to the end of a chapter and I thought, well, there's no way I can put the book down now. And normally these hard sci-fi authors was like, well, the ideas are good, they might have a good story, but surely they're not, surely the prose isn't good too. I like Greg Egan as a writer. Well, surely the characters aren't interesting. I was super invested in the characters. Like, There were a number of times I had to stop to think for a moment. I was enjoying the book so much. I would think, is this the best book I've read? Don't worry about it. Just keep reading. We're having fun. And then I get to the end of another chapter, and I'm like, he's done it again. Is this the best book I've ever read? So basically, what I'm saying is, pause the video, go watch Permutation City, come back, and you can agree. Throughout the rest of the video, you can watch the rest of the video, enjoying the fact that my team has Greg Egan on it, the author of Permutation City.
He's your ringer, is he?
Yeah. I think so.
Oh,
I like to think so.
yeah. I have a
My
couple of
channel
his,
is basically just Permutation City propaganda.
that and PKD, right?
Yeah.
And I think you said Kurt Vonnegut as well. He didn't
Yes.
quite make it for me. Maybe he's my sixth man.
Okay.
I really thought about that one a long time. I thought about him. I also thought about Larry Niven. There's a lot of strong United States writers, and I know that you have a lot of strong world players too that we haven't mentioned. I think of quite a few actually, even from the UK. But the one that I thought, and I think you can appreciate this one, is Dan Simmons. Hyperion and the whole Cantos is just such an important piece of science fiction, relatively new, not something from back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. This was written in the 90s to the 2000s. And I think it's definitely reached that classic level where you can mention it in the same breath as Dune or any other science fiction classic. And Dan Simmons is such an amazing writer. He is able to write in horror, science fiction, kind of a supernatural and the terror. Uh, it seems like any genre he turns to, he just is a master. And it's page turning, even though it's dense with ideas. And he mimics the style of, well, for Hyperion, he's mimicking the style of Chaucer. It's it's unbelievable what he brings to the table, literary wise, plot wise, idea wise, and just readability. Uh, well worth your time. As you're saying, I don't know. Do you think people really could start with Hyperion? I know he's written The Hollow Man, I believe, is another one that might be a little bit more accessible in a science fiction realm. There's definitely a few out there. He's
That's
written
a good
some,
question. I think it
yeah.
depends on what you're looking for, perhaps, because I know a lot of fantasy readers
Mhm.
pick up Hyperion because there's a bit of a blend of genres. You got sci-fi, fantasy, horror, and they tend to enjoy it. It seems to be quite well received. So I think it could be a good starting point, but it is, there is a bit of terminology, like the world building. There's kind of a lot, like the first couple of chapters is like, whoa, there's a lot happening here. But after that, I'd say it's fairly readable. And if you are looking for someone that's a little bit more literary, a little bit focuses a bit more on character development and themes, not that he doesn't have cool concepts in there as well, but I think those are things that draw people to Dan Simmons. And man, I thought I dodged a Kurt Vonnegut shaped bullet, only for you to hit me with Dan Simmons, probably also in my top 5 writers. So I'm diving and dodging some of my favorites here. But yeah, the Hyperion Cantos I love, and the Ilium and Olympus duology. I think the highs are arguably as high. It's just a little bit more inconsistent. I had a few more issues with that duology, but still amazing, amazing books like the Iliad and the Odyssey on Mars, like with like robots and aliens. Like, what the heck? Sign me up. That sounds awesome. And for the most part, it is.
I'm curious, as I think about our teams here, as I think about USA science fiction writing versus world writing, are there sort of some big generalizations you can make in terms of how they're different or how they developed, perhaps?
That's a good question. I had to think about this, and I think the biggest differences you'll find will vary author to author. But if I were to try and find some similarities across the different groups, I would argue that American authors are perhaps slightly more optimistic, or optimistic about humanity's future with space travel and their encounters with aliens, and I don't know if that's a bit of a belief just because like the US is like the source of NASA, and this kind of like this pride of like we are leading space travel, like things are going to go well because we are at the helm. And that might not represent the thoughts of all American authors, but I feel like you maybe get a little bit more of that in terms of maybe space opera or first contact, or military science fiction, whereas in some international science fiction, I think on an individual level that the themes might represent their experiences. Soviet writers might work in some themes to do with their experience in Russia, say, into their science fiction, or wherever they're writing from. Cixin Liu includes the Chinese Cultural Revolution kind of as a backdrop to that science fiction story. That sort of informs his writing. So I think they're all unique, but if I had to guess on average, I feel like the international writers are just a little bit more pessimistic, a little bit more nihilistic, a little bit more wary of how maybe first contact would go. Maybe that wouldn't be such a good thing for humanity to detect alien life in space.
I had a couple thoughts about that too. I thought sort of the frontier spirit, the newness of the country of United States, the sort of the can do, we can cross this country and make it our own, kind of is part of the DNA now of all Americans in terms of pursuing that dream. I think you're right when it comes to apocalyptic type or post-apocalyptic type scenarios. There seems to be more of a we can make this work, or we can defeat those who are evil around us, and create a life. The other thing I sort of thought about was historic. There's been some great authors here. I'm just going to go to some old ones: Verne and Wells, and Shelley. There were some great authors that started this outside of the United States, really. And in the United States, we had Poe and Edgar Rice Burroughs. And I think that Edgar Rice Burroughs is more of a pulp type author. People might know they wrote Tarzan, but he also wrote John Carter of Mars, lots of series. And the pulp magazines came out in the 1920s to the 1930s, and their emphasis was on quick action stories that could attract teenage boys, and very readable. And so I think that there's a bit of more of a literary start outside of the United States, and inside of the United States, I think that they were more going for that, just that consumable product. And it took a while for them to move beyond that. And they started publishing novels really in the United States in the late 40s, early 50s. At first, they were stitching together stories from those earlier years. But as the novel started to develop, I think then they started to potentially come closer to where the world already was. So I think some of the early world novels may be more thoughtful, literary, and interesting than the early United States novels.
Yeah, it is interesting how the form can influence the art. The way that a lot of science fiction was getting published around the 20s, 30s, and 40s was through science fiction magazines in the form of short stories, and that kind of led to the fix-up novels. And it wasn't until maybe the 50s where science fiction novels were getting published more regularly by like a wider range of publishers. Like science fiction novels existed before then, but as a percentage of the genre, the novels started to increase around that time. And so the types of things that you can explore through a short story might be different than a novel. That's why maybe some of those classic writers kind of grew up focusing on the ideas, because you might be able to explore a cool sci-fi idea within the space of a short story, and fleshing out characters and all of that nonsense. Like who needs that? We're here to do sci-fi, baby. That's not what our training. That's not what our background is in.
Is that your Hugo Gernsback, or he's one of the first guys who was doing those pulp magazines for science fiction?
Nice.
I can see a cigar in your mouth as you said that.
I've aged myself, but hopefully it was worth it in in defense of science fiction.
Well, you know what? I think this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on to chat about this. I think we could go on and on with authors if we wanted to.
Yes, I left out some of my favorite UK authors, but I wanted to spread the love. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Alistair Reynolds, Arthur C.
Yes.
Clarke, Mary Shelley, many others, but I wanted it to be a truly globally represented team. So I got some other authors in there, maybe some lesser known authors, but hopefully to do
I was a little
the rest
surprised
of the
that it
planet
didn't.
justice.
I was a little surprised I didn't hear Strugatsky. You could have got two guys for the price of one there. Or I could have done James S.A. Corey and then done the same here for United States.
Nice. I was trying to remember the Thanos quote and butchered it, but I was trying to do something about like there we go, balanced as all things should be. There we go.
So tell us a little bit about what's happening on your channel now and where you're planning to go in the next couple videos.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that I'm working towards. A video that I want to make in the near future is on the topic of modern science fiction, the direction it's headed. How does it compare to classic science fiction? What are my thoughts on some of the latest trends? And then I'm always trying to read a wide range of science fiction, a good mix of modern classic, hard, soft, that kind of thing. But there are a couple of genres that I've picked to try and round out my reading on for 2025, and that's dystopian books as well as cyberpunk. So at some point this year, I want to make some dedicated genre videos, and those will be a couple of them.
Sounds interesting. I'll be watching.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jonathan. I wish you all the best in your channel, and everybody should go and see his channel. There's lots of great things there. There's some great playlists there. We talked about some of the authors that are on those playlists, and be sure to subscribe.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. This was fun. I look forward to seeing all the hashtag Team Jonathan, hashtag Team World comments under this video. Until next time, keep reading.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Appreciate it.